Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Gabriel's weather forecast. Today we're going to be discussing the 2023 to 2024 Northern Hemisphere United States winter, which marks the return of an El Nino after a prolonged 3-year triple dip, as we call it, La Nina pattern. For those of you who don't know, before we get into some of these analog years, I'm just going to talk about what El Nino is. So El Nino is essentially a warmer than average positive anomalies in the Pacific Ocean, just off the coast of South America, extending as far west as the central part of the Pacific Ocean. And where we measure that is the Nino 3.4 region, which is essentially a central region that is about 1,000 miles west of the coast of Ecuador, and that is right along the equator, of course, and that is where we see currently positive temperature anomalies. Now, El Nino right now is still in its moderate phase. It's expected to strengthen significantly to strong and potentially even super El Nino status, although that's a little bit less unlikely. Last time we had a super El Nino was 1516. I won't talk about that one today since we're not looking at the year like that. But before I get into the actual forecast, I do want to point out some top years that maybe have some similarities to this year. So, for example, 57, 58, it was a moderate to strong El Nino with about a degree to a degree and a half Celsius above the you know, above normal, which is moderate to strong. And there was some above normal snow in the south and northeast. I don't have a lot of data on temperature, but preliminary data that I do have shows it was kind of mostly average for the northern half and maybe slightly cool for the southwest and southeast. So that, already gives me a little impression like, okay, it's going to be warmer in the north and cooler in the south. Got it, but it doesn't always work that way because warmer than normal in the north is still colder than whatever is in the south. 82, 83 was a strong to almost super El Nino, actually, closer to 2 degrees Celsius, and it was definitely warmer than normal nationwide. There was several big snows along the coastal northeast and the mid south. However, there were also some issues where some of that snow data was missing, especially right along the coast, so I cannot actually tell whether the coastal storms that did come up the coast really did drop significant snowfall right up to the coast, or whether that was actually rain and the snow totals dropped off significantly near the I-95 corridor. 2002, 2003 was a moderate Pinocchio El Nino, which means it was centrally based and it was moderate, like a degree to a degree and a half Celsius above normal. And it was similar other teleconnections to this year, which I'll talk about later. However, there was significantly above normal snow and in the east. It was also particularly cold winter, one of the colder ones in recent history, which is interesting to note because this year has a lot of similarities to 2, 3. And 910 just was another moderate Pinocchio El Nino with but that one just had record snow, for everywhere. I joked that was the year that New York to DC saw their crazy snowy winters, just like, 15, 16. But 15, 16 was also a super El Nino. However, that one doesn't really look like this year, especially since that was the torch nationwide. 910 was also pretty cool in the Northeast as well as the Southeast. It was a little bit warmer in the Northwest to the upper Midwest, and it did have some significant precipitation in the Southwest, which and all this I took in consideration when looking at the temperatures and precipitation for this upcoming winter. But I've also, taken a look at what the current conditions are. You can't just go off analogs. You also have to look at the current conditions. Looking at the future, you have to look at the past, sure, but you also look at the present to see, okay, do we have a positive NAO, negative NAO, positive PNA, negative PNA? What do we have here? And how is that going to influence, our period of like November through March, essentially the cold season? And that's why, when we take a look at our temperature anomalies forecast, I've centered the most warmth over the northern and western United States, and the cold, especially the most prolonged cold, over the northeastern tier of the United States. And the reason for that is when you have an El Nino, you have a jet stream that comes in over California and Nevada, and then it comes across the south and then up the east coast, right? You have also a polar jet coming out of Canada, and that tends to vary quite a bit, whereas the subtropical jet that comes into California is pretty darn consistent. And what you get is you get that positive, that the warmer than normal pattern, especially for the northwest. And that's something that is really interesting in El Nino because in the La Nina, that is actually where it tends to be colder. So, it's a complete flip from something we've had in the past 3 years where it's been a little bit colder than normal in the north and northwest. This year, we're not necessarily expecting that so much. And that warmth also extends into the parts of the Rockies, the upper Midwest, Minnesota, North Dakota. But you'll notice that that warmth does decrease significantly. And again, this is anomalies. This doesn't necessarily mean that Seattle's 80 degrees and Miami's 20. This just means a certain number of degrees above your normal. So let's say your normal in Seattle is 45 for January, it might be 50 Miami, it might be 36, 76 your average, it might be 73. The anomalies doesn't necessarily point out that it's going to be hotter in Seattle than the Northeast. It just points out that it's going to be further above your normal. And your normal, whatever that is, I'm sure you know what that is for your winter. And so I think that's what's important to note about this is the gradient just shows where the confidence is in the above normal temperatures, and then transitioning to like the neutral temperatures where you kind of a toss up, and then the cool to the normal. Okay, more increasing confidence, light blue, dark blue, purple, to where you have that pretty significant confidence in those normal temperatures. And I feel like that this year is going to be mostly across the Midwest, at least the eastern half of the Midwest, definitely across the all the Appalachian Mountains, straight down to the mid South, and then up the East Coast, especially the Northeast New England region. I think you're going to see plenty of cold shots there, and I think also with the jet stream coming out of the South as opposed to the West this time, we're not going to see that ridge trying to build in the South and push that cold back into Canada. You're going to see it be able to spill out more and more. As I mentioned, in El Nino, storms tend to move in across California, and that is why I have highlighted some above normal precipitation for the southwest, the mid south, and especially the eastern half of the nation, where you get that storm track, where storms track across Texas, Louisiana, then towards the Gulf Coast and up the East Coast. That's going to be a pretty significant track. That is actually a classic nor'easter track, and we're going to see a lot of that throughout this cold season. I feel like it also could get started early, throughout hurricane season with potential tropical systems making that path. But I feel like as we head into winter and this El Nino pattern gets cemented further, we're definitely going to see plenty of action in the east, the southeast as well. Where I think it's going to be a little bit drier is the northern half of the country, west of the Great Lakes. I think the northwest, if I had to put a region where I think it's really going to be dry, and that's the northwest and the northern Rockies. You're not going to see those storms moving in across the north and dipping south across the Midwest and cutting across the Great Lakes. That's what you often see in a La Nina. So a La Nina, it essentially is the opposite of this, where you see above normal precipitation for the northern half of the country and kind of drier conditions for the south. But we are in an El Nino, which means that we're going to see those low normal precipitation anomalies be placed further north, across the upper Midwest, across the northern Rockies, across the Pacific Northwest. And those are also areas that are typically quite wet, so you will notice it. Northeast, I still think you're going to be above all precipitation because you're going to get that storm track that comes right out of the Gulf and then rides the Gulf Stream straight up the East Coast. Before I get into the actual overall forecast, which you just saw a little sneak peek of, I want to make some comments about some of those teleconnections which we often discuss about winter. So there are some early signs of a negative NAO, which is essentially negative negative North Atlantic oscillation. Sorry, negative North Atlantic oscillation, and the North Atlantic Oscillation provides significant blocking when it's negative, so that storms, when they come up the East Coast, they slow down and they get right up to the coast. They don't just go straight out to sea, which is why when you have a negative NAO, you often see those blockbuster snowstorms, DC, Philly, New York, Boston, loads of snow, straight up that 95 corridor when you have a negative NAO. Especially if the PNA is positive, which is more often happening in El Nino, because you see those warmer than normal temperatures in the northwest, which leads to a ridge forming in the west and therefore a downstream trough in the east. I also noted that, it's not expected to be as anomalously warm in the desert southwest, and this is just, of course, due to that jet stream that comes across, due to enhanced precipitation, simply, and that's not going to be to lack of ridging. The ridging will definitely be in the west, but I think that, when you compare it to your average temperatures, it'll be a little bit closer to average. I put it in the, equal chances of seeing above and below, but I feel like it's more likely to lean above normal precipitation, and of course above normal temperatures. So I think warm and wet is definitely a theme that you can see in an El Nino in the south and in the west, especially. And so that's just why I've said that I haven't put that into a yellow shading, just because I don't feel like it's going to be as warm because the jet stream will be there and it will be enhancing that precipitation. Now, I'm not going to provide a snowfall anomaly map, and there's a very specific reasons to why. Because the only thing I can actually say to you guys is the chances of the anomalies. I cannot tell you that you will certainly see more or less snow than normal. That is literally impossible. Such things are impossible. I cannot say that. I can only say that you have a better chance to see more or less snow than normal. And there's a big difference there. Some people say, oh, it's going to be massive snow in the Northeast, massive snow in the West. Well, no, you can't say that. You can say there's a greater than normal chance that you're going to see more snow, but I can't tell you. Like, if you ask me how much snow there is in Chicago this year, I'm not going to give you a number. I'm going to say you have a lower chance of seeing above normal snowfall because you're not getting that storm track. But I'm not going to say you're going to see less snow than normal because all it takes is one storm to skew those anomalies and make a prediction like that incorrect. And that is why when you're forecasting a season, you need to be very careful that you're only looking at confidence and chances. You're not looking at certainty. And therefore, I present to you the official regional winter forecast. And this is all general. This is all general based off your average. Essentially, what I'm putting here, these comments, is compared to your normal. Doesn't necessarily mean northwest, for example, warm and dry. It's wet and it's cool in the northwest in the winter. It's just going to be a little bit warmer and definitely a little bit drier than normal. Does it mean it's going to be a torch and dry all winter? No, you're going to still have storms coming through. It's just going to be less frequent due to the El Nino. Southwest, you might have a slightly somewhat warmer winter, but it's definitely going to be very wet, so wetter than typical. Your El Nino will provide across the northern Rockies, the plain states. You might have closer to average temperatures. It will lean above normal temperatures slightly. You're definitely going to be drier than normal, however, and that's important to know. However, the mountains will still see plenty of snow from the storm trekking through. I just think that the valley snow and the valley rain will be less prolific this winter than it has in past winters, where the storms dove out of Canada. I think this year the storms are more going to come out of the southwest, and they may not have time to cut across. They may be shoved further south. When you move towards Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico area, into the southern plains and the southwestern Midwest, it's going to be cooler for sure. It's also going to be much wetter than normal. And, in a La Nina, which you had the past 3 years, it's been pretty dry. And I also think some snow is possible in areas further south than you typically expect it, like south of Dallas towards Austin, potentially even Houston, seeing a little bit of that wintry weather this season, just because you're seeing the El Nino, you're seeing the colder than normal temperatures, and you're seeing the storms actually move through, as opposed to coming out of your north, which does prevent some of that snow from occurring. It's coming from your west instead, which does increase the chances of those events, snow, ice, sleet events. You're not going to see like 50 inches of snow in Dallas. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it'll be cooler, it'll be wetter, and you have a greater chance of seeing significantly more snow than you might in a La Nina. In a La Nina, I might say it's going to be average temperatures, and it might be a little bit warmer, a little bit drier. But I think in this case, you're going to see the complete opposite. That's going to be colder and wetter. Moving to the northwest, it's going to be cold. I'm certain about that. I think, especially the eastern half of that region, it's going to be definitely below normal temperatures. The western half, I'm a little bit more on the fence of, but I still think it's going to be cold. It's always cold in the Midwest in the winter, so don't get me wrong. Even if it's slightly warmer than normal, you're still going to be cold. However, I don't think as much snow or rain is going to happen this year as it's happened the last 3 winters. The last 3 winters have been really prolific, especially Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, and into the Great Lakes. I think those areas have been incredibly lucky with getting loads of snow. You're not going to see that this year because you're not going to see storms that move across the west and then cut across the Great Lakes. It doesn't happen in El Nino. You may have a storm or two, and that's why I'm not going to say you're going to get no snow or way below normal snowfall. You just have a lower chance of reaching your normal snowfall. Or, in many cases, also rain too. You're going to have a less chance of seeing significant rain. I think the further east you go in the region, maybe that'll be less of an impact. You might be even colder, and you're also going to be a little more precipitation wise further east of the Great Lakes, whereas I think the Midwest, Minnesota, Dakotas, Wisconsin, you're definitely going to be drier. You're going to lean drier. You're also going to lean a little bit warmer too, which may impact the snowfall. And so, whatever storms do come through, they could fall as rain instead. To the south of you, zone extending from the mid-Atlantic, Virginia, North Carolina, all the way down to northern Louisiana, Arkansas, into southern Missouri, is the ice zone. And this is where the storms, as they track through towards the east coast, could produce some icy, sleet, wet, rain, snow, sloppy mix. And that can be really dangerous, especially if ice accretes on surfaces and you drive on it or you walk on it. It can produce a lot of injuries. Ice storms are some of the most destructive storms. Hurricanes, obviously, and tornadoes, too, but the point is that that is a zone where I'm highlighting for the increased potential of ice this winter. And it's like that every winter, sure. But this year, I think I've placed it just a little bit further south than I have in the past because I think it's going to be more significant this year than in past years. And sure, you get ice storms every year. You're like, well, okay, you get tons of ice, tons of snow, tons of sleet. But this year, because you have a southern storm track, your storm's coming out of the south. You're going to have plenty of cold from the north. I think the northern half of the zone could be more snow, and I think the southern half could be more rain. Just like it's going to be relentlessly stormy and chilly in the southeast and Florida, extending west to Louisiana and eastern Texas. relentlessly stormy. It's going to be very wet. And this is something that I can see on every single model I've looked at. It will be wet and it will also be chilly. Those below normal temperatures due to the El Nino will be prolific. And this is something that's a big change for you. The past 3 years, you've had very warm temperatures, especially the southeast where you've got that ridge. This year, I think we're looking at an eastern trough, which is going to help bring some chilly temperatures. You could see below normal 2, 3 Celsius degrees below normal temperatures as opposed to a warmer winter, which could also increase the potential for potentially a little bit of snow and ice in the northern half of those regions. I don't think Atlanta, you're out of the woods for snow this year. I also don't think, Charlotte, Raleigh, you could potentially looking at a little bit of snow. I don't think Florida will see snow, but I also think that it's not unheard of. And, when you look at chances and probability, typically in El Nino, the southeast has an increased probability of snow and ice. And this moves me on to the northeastern region. Cold and huge snows. Now you're going to say, okay, Harold, it's a big stigma, right? Because you say that every winter. Because actually, it's true. Because the chances of having cold are always there. It's very cold in the Northeast every single winter. Even if it's above normal, it's still cold. And there's still a huge snows somewhere. I'm just highlighting the fact that this year looks like it's going to have an increased number of storms, meaning there's a higher chance for those big storms to come through. And when they do roll through, they will be more impactful and dump heavy snowfall. And I also think those below normal temperatures will be the most significant and the most impactful. And you could have a few Arctic blasts as well, which do increase heating demands. So that's why I'm just highlighting that for the more impactful cold and snow. Just because you have, somewhat average cold and snow is great, but this year I'm seeing signs of even more of that. You increase last winter. I know you had a snowless corridor, I-95 corridor snow. You had no snow essentially from DC to Philly to Boston. This year, the opposite. I think you're going to have a lot more opportunities for snow just because of the way the storms will track. They'll cross the Gulf and then they'll go up the East Coast and you'll have the cold air in place. And if it's just set up right, which I think it will be set up right a lot of the time, you could see heavy snow dumped on that area. And I also think that the precipitation will mostly fall as snow this year as opposed to rain. Now, the cold is, you'll have some Arctic blast for sure, which could produce the most confidence in below normal temperatures, and that's why in the precipitation and map you're above normal, and in the temperature map you are below normal temperatures. And so that's why I think the Northeast will have that impactful winter. The way it's been the last 3 years is completely opposite, where it was warm and dry. I think this year we're going to lean cold and we're going to lean snowy. And again, as I'm saying, I'm not going to provide the snowfall anomaly map because, again, I can't do that. It wouldn't be right, and it's not actually accurate to tell you you're going to see 3 times your average snowfall. I can't tell you that because one storm, again, if you live in DC, your average snow is 15 inches a year or whatever. I think it is about 15 inches actually, so I got that right off the top of my head. You have a 2 foot blizzard. That's above normal snow. Great. I could tell you you have a higher chance of that this year, but you live in Chicago, and I say you're going to get half your snowfall. Oh, what happens when a 2 foot blizzard comes in? Well, you get lots of snow and you go above normal and you say, hey, Gabriel, you're wrong. So that's why I actually can't provide that to you. But I can also say that the chances of seeing more snow are along the East Coast and the South, and the chances of seeing less snow are greater across the northern third extending into the Great Lakes. So I hope you've understood this. I hope this gives you a greater clarity on what to expect this winter. And I also hope that you've enjoyed this forecast, enjoyed, seeing what to expect for this upcoming winter. I hope you subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, ask questions. You can comment your location. I can give you a regional forecast if you need a little more specifics. Or you can just go ahead for a like video, comments, tell me what you like, what do you want to see more of. I'll be providing more updates as we get closer to the winter time, and also some pattern updates, like what am I seeing? Is this need to be tweaked a little bit? I'll release kind of an updated version as we get much closer to winter. I know it's significantly way too early to fully cement this in stone, but this is just a preliminary look at, we're heading into the colder season now. How's winter going to be? I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.